Hello, boys and girls. I am making a screencastify to help you with your hooks. And the hook we're going to work with for our cat dog opinion essay specifically is a descriptive segment. So, in this presentation, this is for an introduction. The idea is that there are resources here for you to write an introduction. And what would that look like? Well, you're going to have three parts. On the slide, first of all, make sure you insert your picture here. Do not forget that by, I guess, the end of the week, please make sure that you give two compliments and a push to another writer. So just periodically check that, please, to see if we are finished with them. Now, for the three parts of the introduction, I want you to make sure that you have each part. The first part is a hook. And there are lots of ways to do hooks, but for this particular hook, we're going to work with a descriptive segment. And that should be written right here in this box. And the point of a descriptive segment is to paint a very vivid picture in the reader's mind about your topic. And you want to appeal to the reader. Usually, to do that, working with sensory details does help. So I did include a website that will review the sensory details, plus I made a slide that gives you some suggestions here if you'd like to try and use some of that in your writing. That will help. Now, the hook is the way to get your reader interested and grabbed, okay, and to stay reading. And you're going to do that with description. I want to call attention to this slide I just inserted because for our descriptive scenes, there are a couple of suggestions here. What I'm noticing when I'm looking at most of the descriptive scenes that are here in the first part is I want to make sure that everyone's aware of these samples. So even if you wrote yours already, I think you should check this out for the most part. And I would click on the samples. When you open up the samples, what you're going to notice is that the first portion here describes what a descriptive segment is. Now, this is not about cats or dogs, but when I read it aloud, I want you to think about how descriptive it is and how the writer is doing this. I want you to listen for adjectives and verbs and if you can picture what's happening. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and just picture this in your mind. Close your eyes. Thank you. He sprints forward, muscles rippling, easily taking long, graceful strides. Breathing deeply, his heart pumps oxygen to his blood and energy flows through him, carrying him on. Every part of his body performs like a component of a well-oiled machine. He crosses the finish line of the marathon with a smile on his face. This is not a high school track star or an Olympic athlete. It is a 70-year-old man who has made exercise a regular part of his life, and you can do the same. And if maintaining lifelong health is important to you, joining a gym is something to seriously consider. Now, this portion here is considered the thesis. This portion here is the hook. That's the descriptive segment. This portion here, where they kind of relate the descriptive scene of the 70-year-old man that links to the thesis, is what we would call the bridge. So this portion here, it is a 70-year-old man who has made exercise a regular part of his life, and you can do the same. You can consider that an anecdote or a suggestion. You can make it a personal anecdote or you can connect it some sort of bridge sentence. They can vary, but that connects your descriptive scene with your thesis is what we're looking for. So if you looked on the presentation and you took a look at the descriptive scenes, these are particular ones from previous years. Okay, so I'd like you to take a moment just to read this, and I'll read it with you. Dogs, darling and delightful. I want you to listen for adjectives, describing words. I also want you to listen for what types of sentences you hear and what types of sentences you do not hear. There are different types. Um, Declarative sentences are regular sentences with periods, and interrogative sentences are sentences with question marks. I want you to think about that. Exclamatory sentences have exclamation marks. So I want you to think about what you hear and don't hear. You miserably think about the homework and chores awaiting you as you walk home from your dreadful day at school. When you open the door to your house, all of your worries disappear because sitting near the door is your excellent and intelligent companion waiting for your return from school. Your pooch urges you to play fetch with her, and you just can't resist the temptation to play. And at the end of your game, you feel energized and happy enough to finish your chores and school assignments. I want you to think about for what type of sentence you did not hear. So I want you to think about if you heard declarative sentences that end in a period, if you heard any exclamatory sentences, or if you heard any question interrogative sentences. After walking home from a dreadful day of school with a headache, you plop on the couch and slowly doze off to sleep. Suddenly, you feel a wet, slobbery lick on your cheek and a hissing sound. As you slowly open your eyes, you see a cute little dog wagging its tail, conveying that it's happy and excited to see you. At that very moment, all of your tiresomeness comes to a halt, and you are all ready to take your dog to the park. You enjoy every moment at the park by cuddling and playing with the dog. You've now had the best afternoon with your furry little friend. Again, I want you to listen for the adjectives, the description, the scene that's painted, and I want you to listen for what type of sentence you do not hear. So think, did you hear declarative sentences with periods? Did you hear exclamatory? Did you hear interrogative? Any ones that end in question marks? Think about that for a moment. Sadly, knowing that you have tons of homework to do, you plop your bag down and start writing your essay. Just then, you hear your furry feline softly purring from the living room. You then run toward your living room, pick up your cat, and run back to your desk to finish your essay that you have yet to complete. With your cat in your lap purring soothingly, you forget how much homework you have. It feels like a minute and you are done with your homework. And they kind of go into a bridge about why. So a lot of the scenes are similar. We did do these in the past, and children picked a very similar descriptive scene, most of them coming home from school and describing why it would be beneficial to have a pet welcoming you, soothing you, kind of just being your pal or companion. And they usually depicted or showed a kind of um, difficult day and how the pet improved. So you could go that route. You can look at the samples again, they're in the presentation, but I want you to kind of think about what was not used. And my recommendation for this is it's a descriptive scene. So, unless you are asking questions towards the end, and maybe just one question where you ask a reader to imagine a scenario, you really can't ask questions right to the reader for this because you haven't described a scene. So if you generally started off yesterday your descriptive scene with questions, I need you to go back and work on it again because that's not really the hook we're looking for. You want to describe a scene. And if you go right into asking a reader, um, do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want this? And ask them in a kind of laundry list way, that's not generally going to grab a reader. Remember, you're trying to convince someone that a cat or a dog is the best pet, and one of the ways you do that is you have to sell the idea of a cat or a dog. And you can do that easily by presenting a picture to them that seems irresistible. It seems like something they've got to have, and you really have to sell it. Asking the reader a bunch of questions before they're really sold, well, you're probably going to lose some readers that way. So here are some suggestions because I saw that more than half of you were using questions for your descriptive scenes. So my first advice is to really clearly read the directions. Please take a look at the samples that are linked in the presentation and then just kind of think about it. There were a couple of ones that were very, very descriptive and were on the right track. I would check out I'll just go ahead and take a look. Marcus did a really great job. You can take a minute to read that. I'm just looking at the descriptive scene right now. It was a great idea about a pet shop. So you can think about, if you're walking into a pet shop, what does it look like? What does it sound like? There looks like there's some sensory details in here as well. Again, the sensory list, I did make another slide, and you can definitely, if you put yourself in a pet shop, you could definitely use some of these sensory um, sentence starters. I also saw a couple in which we have yes, Eric was working on some of these too. There were some sensory details as well. Okay. And Kara chose sound as well. So there's a question here, but that question is not asking a series of questions. Would you like this? Would you like this? Would you like this? Um, when you ask a series of questions, that is a way to start off our persuasive piece, but it's not a descriptive segment. So I want you to go ahead and take a look at what you did yesterday. And again, it's not due. And this is how we learn. If we were in class together, we would have talked about this and went over it in class. But I want you to think about what you wrote for your descriptive segment. And because at this point, your thesis should have been done, and you were really just focusing on descriptive segment and the bridge. And the bridge really can just be 1 or 2 sentences. The hook or the descriptive segment can be 3 or 4. I want you to think about, when you look at your hook, are you describing a scene, or are you just asking the reader questions? It looked like a lot of you took what you had written for your for your thesis. A lot of you wrote a very long introduction for the thesis on the shared document, and it looks like a lot of you took that and put that into your hook. The reason why we did the thesis first is because I wanted to kind of take our time with that and then go into it. But this is different. You want to paint a whole scene. And for this, it's okay to use the word you. You're painting a scene to kind of another reader to picture something. So you want to be descriptive about it, and you want them to close their eyes and kind of picture it. It's okay to use the word you. So this looks like you are, this has very descriptive and kind of went into describing what life would be like with this pet. So here are some ideas. I don't want to take up too much time, and I don't have time to write one out. You have wonderful ideas and you're amazing writers, but I want you to backtrack a little bit. And if you haven't started it, no problem. It's not due till today. But if you already did, I really need you to go back and check to see if you did create a descriptive scene or if you created a series of questions. So some suggestions for these writing hooks for a descriptive scene can be one in which you are describing the scene. Now, there's not really a character here, but it's more of a describing of the setting. And that's what a lot of kids have done in the past. When you're talking about walking into a pet shop and describing all of the sights and sounds and all of the choices, and then kind of narrowing it down to the one that you think is the best, you could definitely describe with sensory details being inside a pet shop. Okay. Another scene that works well could be coming home from school or coming into your home. Any scenario where you're with an animal and you want someone else to picture what it's like. So the easiest way to do this, I think, is to think about, if you really love a cat or a dog, think about the positive experiences you have with a cat or a dog. And where are you? Are you in a backyard? Are you in a basement? Are you outside at a dog park? Are you on, a cat or play date maybe? So think about where those positive experiences might be and describe it to the reader. Because again, you're trying to sell this idea of getting a cat or a dog and why they are the best. So think about where you would be with this animal and what makes it amazing, and then try to sprinkle in those sensory details. Another idea could be actions, right? So think of actions, and the actions can be in a different place. Maybe you're at a dog park and you're describing all of the activity and all the wonderful fun that dogs can have with others. Maybe you're describing a playful moment with a cat. You could also describe the action very slowly and don't say right away what is happening. But as you read on, you can kind of figure out, almost like a riddle, that a cat or a dog is involved. So some sort of action. Now, another way that's similar to start that off, that reminds me of Kara's, is to start with sound words. Onomatopoeia. Describe what's happening, and you can think about what would be something positive that would make someone want to think of a dog or a cat? Where would you be? So think of where you would be, what you would be doing, and how much fun you would basically be having. Try to be like a commercial. Now, the dialogue and the inner dialogue, when you're working with most of the descriptive scenes here, this is kind of inner dialogue. There's no quotation marks. It's just the reader thinking out loud. And when they're thinking out loud and they're using that you, they're just kind of thinking out loud and painting a picture for someone else. You could use that strategy as well, and you could use some dialogue, but if you use dialogue, I would basically kind of describe, if you have a conversation with a parent, maybe about having a dog, right, or a cat. So when would this happen? Well, it could happen at the dinner table, and you can paint a scene where everyone's eating, everyone's there, but there's just something missing. It's time for our family to get a pet, and you can have a little conversation. If you want to have it be a conversation where you basically describe what happens, you could. If you wanted to put in quotation marks, you certainly could, but that might be an area where you might have a conversation with someone. You could also have a conversation with another cat lover, a dog lover, someone selling a dog or a cat might be something you can use too. I've never had a child use flashbacks or flash forwards, but you're welcome to try. An interesting idea might be to kind of present what could happen in the future, right? So you might say to the reader, picture this, and you go on to all these amazing things. And, this could happen if you make the choice to buy, and then you tell what. As far as a flashback, I suppose you could have someone think about a time in which they had a companion and describe it that way. That might be a little bit more tricky, but you're super creative. You can give it a try. Sound words we talked about. Any strong feelings of emotion. So a lot of kids in the past, when they did the descriptive scenes, they kind of had a dire situation that was made better by an animal being in there. So you could sell that, right? So if a lot of times in commercials, there's a problem and there's a solution. So a lot of kids in their descriptive scenes, they had situations where they had a lot of work, they had kind of miserable, sad days, and then here came this cat or dog to solve things. So you could use that as well. My best advice with that is say, put yourself in a situation in which a cat or a dog might be a good solution. Now, you're welcome to use current times. If you want to use current, times, obviously we're all spending a lot of times indoors. You're welcome to paint a descriptive scene. In fact, it's probably a great time to get a pet now because people have more time. um, Figurative language you can use here and there, sprinkle it like breadcrumbs. You can use similes, you can use a metaphor. You don't have to have the entire scene be like that, but that can be used as needed. So what I'd like you to do is I added these two slides. I want you to kind of take a look at some of the sentence starters that might help you. And you can change the words as needed to fit what you need. But I want you to kind of zoom through to see and look to see how you did on your work yesterday, or if you haven't started it yet, this will give you a springboard to write a correct descriptive scene. There are samples right here that you can take a look at. And there are also samples here of what a bridge sentence would be. Now, I don't want to spend too long on this, and this is a little bit new for you, but for a bridge sentence, it's just a way to connect to the thesis. Because remember, a descriptive scene is going to tell the reader and kind of convince them, kind of draw them in. But then you'd have to get them out of the scene, right? So it's like a scene change almost, like if you were in Hollywood and making a movie. And then the thesis is basically going to tell them what your opinion is and exactly the three reasons. So you want to just quickly kind of connect it. You don't want your descriptive scene to be too long. You're not making a movie, you're making a scene, okay? And then you want to connect it a little bit in a way to kind of grab your reader and then focus them to the thesis. You can do this in a couple of ways. Sometimes if you relate a story that happened to you and then lead to the thesis, or you can kind of continue, like in this one, you can continue to explain to the reader why this would be a great idea to get a pet. Now, in this one, they have a descriptive scene and then they do their bridge. You start to do your chores and homework while feeling happy. Who wouldn't want this every day? Now, that question is absolutely fine. Where it comes in is later after they have described it. I wouldn't start asking questions from the beginning because you haven't shown any descriptive scene. And if you run the risk of your reader hearing one question and saying, nah, never mind, and then you've lost your whole reader. So you don't want to ask any questions until you've described something pretty irresistible to your reader. And by then you've hooked them already. Okay. So if you take a look at this one, they have a great descriptive scene. And this particular one, in this case, the person does not have a cat, but they're explaining this scene that I've just explained to you. Well, that's what I wish I could have happen to me. But if you were to own a cat, then you would have this benefit. So this portion where you have some samples for the bridge, that's also located in the presentation. So make sure you take a look at that and just take a look at the directions really carefully. Don't forget to put a picture in. You can do 2 praises and a push to another writer, please, as soon as possible. And remember that your hook does not have to be that long. About 3 or 4 sentences work well, but again, it has to be a descriptive segment. You want to make sure that you are describing something. So anytime that you've gone to art class and you've painted a beautiful scene with any art materials, you're doing that with your words. Use your sensory details. And the best way to get started is to think about what would appeal to other people. Where would you be? What would be happening? What scene could you imagine or be part of that involves a cat or a dog? Because this is basically your commercial to make a cat or a dog adoption convincing for someone else. Your bridge is just going to simply connect in 1 or 2 sentences to the thesis. It could be a very short story of how maybe a cat or a dog has helped you in your life, or perhaps this same scene, how you've had that scene work for you, and then lead it into the thesis. Or you can just kind of lead the story into the thesis by saying, similar to what we just saw, like, this can happen to you too. Imagine what your life would be if you had this every day after painting a scene of something amazing. So you just want to hook your reader with a descriptive scene, but then connect it in a way. And it can be in a way in which you do kind of have the reader imagine it be true, or you can relate your own experience as well, but a short story, and then go into your thesis. Make sure that your thesis is generally about 1 sentence. If your thesis was longer, you may have to kind of arrange things a little bit better, but you want your thesis to be very clear so that your reader knows 3 ideas that you're now going to focus on in your body paragraphs. Okay? So I look forward to seeing your writing, boys and girls. Thank you so much for doing your best every day. My suggestions are just look through the slides carefully, and I would keep, maybe open up this presentation twice so you can have the directions in 1 slide, or 1 tab rather, and you can go through the slides, and then in the other portion, you can do your writing. Okay. But I would definitely open it up twice so you have this, unless you don't mind scrolling back and forth. But some of you that are further on in the alphabet, it might be a lot of scrolling. So open it up twice and use those resources that I added. And please take a look at your writing from yesterday, as well as continue it if you haven't already, and continue to do the great job that you do each day. Thank you so much, writers.